A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Okay, thank you for tuning in to part 2 of my ancestor, my Fulani ancestor Bilali. In this part, I added to the title, The Resurrection, and how to read your DNA analysis. So, before I get into the subject, I want to read from the Quran because it's in me, basically. I come from, the nature and tradition of the scholars of Futajalin, Timbuktu, Futa Masina, and basically the scholars of the Islamic world. You know, what makes a man a kafir in Islam is not because he's a Christian or a Jew. A Christian or a Jew could be a believer in Allah in the last day and still be a Christian or a Jew. What makes a person a kafir is that they're ungrateful. And what happened was when we gave from the study of the Quran, it inspired, advancements in astronomy, mathematics, the earth sciences, chemistry, all endeavors of the human being. And we brought those sciences to Europe. And when we brought those sciences to Europe, they took those sciences, but unlike the scholars who were inspired by the Quran, in order to get these sciences and derive them from the Quran, what the European did, they took them and they make no mention of Allah. Even though most of their education is based on, in fact, their educational system, the university comes out of the Islamic world, North Africa in particular. There were no universities before that. So we brought the concept of university to them. So now they have all these universities based on the study of the Quran, which produced the university, and they don't mention Allah, God at all. In fact, they ban you from, using his name in a quote-unquote intellectual context. And which makes them kafir. Kafir means you're ungrateful because everything you're studying of the universe is Allah's creation. When you study the human being, you're studying Allah's creation. When you study, anthropology, you're studying Allah's creation. When you study the earth sciences and you go into earth, this is all Allah's creation. So how can we start off any education and enlightenment without first giving credit to the Creator, who created this universe that we're studying, and be grateful? So a person is a kafir because they're ungrateful. And I don't want to be a kafir by sharing knowledge about DNA analysis, about, Bilali, about history of our people, and not first give Allah his proper due and his proper credit. So I'm going to start off with the Quran because this type of study I'm doing is right in line with what Allah talks about of the resurrection. So in the Quran, it says, when Abraham said, "My Lord, show me how thou givest life to the dead." And Allah says, this is very interesting, and this could be a subject in itself. He said, "Dost thou not believe?" And Abraham quickly said, "Yes, but that my breast may be at ease." So a lot of times you read the Quran, when you don't understand it, you believe it, but your brain will be bothering you like, okay, well, how does Allah bring this about? And how does Allah do this? I believe he says he does it. I believe it, but how? Because some things in the Quran may sound like magic to you. These magnificent, miraculous things that Allah does, it may sound like magic. The resurrection may sound like magic. Raising somebody from the dead may sound like magic. So you want to know how he does it. So he said, "Yes, but that my breast may be at ease." He said, "Then take 4 birds, then tame them or train them to incline to you, to thee, then place on every mountain a part of them, one of them. Then call them, they will come to thee flying, and know that Allah is mighty wise. Now you may say, well, what does taking 4 birds, placing them on every mountain, a part of them, then call them, and they will come to thee flying? And that is a sign of the resurrection. So from studying this DNA and studying my particular self, and I want to say to those, if you descend from a different people other than Fulani, pardon me, I'm studying myself. You know, we're taught in Islam and taught by the Alhamdulillah, you must first have a thorough knowledge of yourself before you could teach others. But you could take these same principles that I'm applying to the study of myself and who I am and my genetic memory and apply it to you and the people that you descend from. So don't look at it as it's just a Fulani thing. It's a human thing. And inshallah, in part 3, we will get you to understand that even clearer. So, you know, look past me saying Fulani, 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 and look at who you descend from. Use these principles and techniques for discovery and apply it to yourself. So, so I want to start with that, this ayat of the Quran. And so these 4 birds placed on 4 parts, right? And then they come together. So for us as black people in America, we were taken in the slave trade and we were sent to the 4 corners of the earth. It's like, you know, birds fly. They go in different directions. They go in 4 corners of the earth. You see? And they go all over the place. So they took us and put us in the 4 corners of the earth. Some were taking slaves in India. Some were taking slaves in the Middle East. Some were taking slaves in Southern and Central America. And some were taking slaves in Northern America. The 4 corners of the earth. And on the resurrection, when Allah resurrects, he brings us back together as one people. So that's one aspect of the resurrection that applies to this ayat. But there's another aspect, and I want to read from the surah called the resurrection. And this deals with, again, the subject that I'm about to do. So it says here, in the by the way, that was the 260 ayat, second surah, Al-Baqarah 206 ayat, where I read from Abraham and the resurrection. And this one is the 75th. It's entitled The Resurrection, or the Day of Standing, Qiyam. And the 36th ayat, and it starts like this. Does man think that he will be left aimless? Because when you don't know who you are, you're aimless. You don't know what you want to do in life. You don't know your purpose. You're just, you're just walking aimlessly. Does man think that he will be left aimless? Was he not a small life germ? Think about the word Allah is using. Because what is DNA? Germ. Was he not a small life germ? And this is what we're studying here. A DNA analysis, which is really a germ analysis. And not only that, was he not a small life germ and sperm emitted? A sperm is a germ. And this is where we get DNA from. Then he was a clot. So he created, then made perfect. Then he made of him 2 kinds, male and female. So when you study genetic analysis and DNA, you study the maternal DNA, which is the female. You study the paternal DNA, which is the male. So this is a study of Allah's creation. Male and female, maternal, paternal. The germ. This is Allah's laying it out. He's giving you the ayats right here. And then this is the very interesting part, and I'm going to go back, to what Abraham asked Allah and what Allah told him. Allah says, finally, is not he powerful to give life to the dead? Is not, or in other translations, is not that sufficient to give life to the dead? So he's talking about creating us from sperm and in a germ and making us perfect, and then a clot in two kinds, male and females. And he said, is he not powerful to bring about the resurrection? So Allah is showing you, and this is in line with what the Honorable Elijah taught us, the resurrection. Allah is telling you right there that he resurrects you through the process of birth, through a sperm, through a germ. And he brings about this resurrection. So what does that have to do with what Abraham said, what Allah said to Abraham? Excuse me. Not what Abraham said, what Allah said to Abraham. As an ayat, as a sign of that. Allah said, send it to four different places and call them back. Tame them, call them back. See, when you have a sperm cell, in that sperm is information. It's tamed, it's trained to go in to the egg. You see? It's already tamed and trained to go. So it already has information as a germ, as a sperm. It already has information. Well, where does this information come from? When you look at genetics, you have your maternal DNA, your X chromosome, your paternal DNA, your Y chromosome. So that's two corners, just like the birds. That's two. Then you have what I would call your peripheral or tangential relatives, which will make four. Well, what do you mean by that? We all have four grandparents. I had up three fingers for a second, excuse me. Four grandparents, right? And from those four lines becomes one person. From your father's mother, from your father's father, from your mother's mother, from your mother's father. That's four. Just like the four birds. And then he brings them back together. Is that not sufficient for the resurrection? Meaning, the information from one ancestor, the information from another ancestor, the information from another ancestor, and the information from a fourth ancestor, direct lines converging into one. Is that not sufficient for the resurrection? So for me, this study of genetics and DNA is the study of how Allah resurrects the human being. So when you look at me, think about what happened to us in the slave trade, how they took us, and mixed us with all type of people and so forth and so on. But yet, Allah brought everything right back together. That is a magnificent work if you really consider it. It is miraculous if you really consider it. And it says in the 18th surah that I will bring you forth, I will gather you on the day of gathering, I will bring you forth like what I created you the first time. Like what I created you the first time. So before we came here, we looked a certain way. But when they made us slaves, fed us pork, interbred with our women, slept with us, made some of us mulattoes and all this stuff, we didn't look like the way Allah created us the first time when he created us as tribes and families and sent us to different parts of the earth. Because Allah says, surely I created you as tribes and families. And every tribe has a look. So here, Allah, through the birth process, caused us to stand before him just like we were the first time. And as I showed you in the last presentation, and I used the ayat of the Quran, how he creates you again back to your fingertips. And here I look exactly like people born in Africa, look like I never left there, look like I came straight off the plane, from Guinea or from anywhere Fulani come, exactly through this process. So this is the resurrection. So let's go on, because Allah says how he brings these things about through an amr. Amr means a command. It also means an affair. events that happen that causes Allah's will to come about. I love to quote again Surah Al-Kahf, where Allah says, وَكَذَلَّكَ أَثَرْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ لِنَعْلَمُوا أَنَّا وَعَدَ اللَّهِ حَقٌّ. And what that means is that Allah says, and we caused them to stumble upon. Some translation says Allah discloses it to you, but the Arabic atharna means stumble upon. So when he causes you to stumble upon that, he says it's to teach them that the promise of Allah is true. So what do you mean stumble upon? This whole process of learning who I am, I stumbled upon it. I stumbled upon it from the time that, that Ramadan, when that Pulo was talking to me in Pula, and I understood him. I stumbled upon that. From the time I sat in that Senegalese restaurant and that woman said, "Oh my God, you look exactly like Bilali from Guinea." I stumbled upon it. Also, she going to Food Tajal and meeting my wife and all that. I stumbled upon that. This was nothing that I planned and mapped out and wrote down, and I stumbled upon all of that, and that's how Allah teaches you that the promise of Allah is true. When you are not looking for something and you stumble upon it, and then you are taken away on that path, Allah is telling you that that is the clearest of signs that He is teaching you something. So Allah taught me and guided me through this whole process. So I had to take this moment before I continue the subject to give Allah His proper due, because a lot of people give me credit. "Oh man, you did a wonderful job, brother, of finding your roots and so forth and so on." And I truthfully say, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, because I didn't do nothing. Allah caused me to stumble upon this information and still causing me to discover things that I would have never discovered. He causes me to stumble upon it. So, with that being said, let's go into the Amr, the affairs that brought about me in the situations that I'm discussing. So we're going to go back to the map, and I'm going to turn on a light so you can see a little clearer. Voila. So, in the Fulani, you have two types of Fulani, really three. When I was studying the Fulani people, particularly of the Sudan, and it was very interesting how they classified. They said there is the cow Fulani, and in some writings I read it usually the red Fulani. The red Fulani are usually more interested with the cows. Then you have, Fulani have different colors, different hues. You have a yellowish like Fulani that's closer to the Berber look, and then you have the black Fulani. So usually in the Fulani family, even my family, you have, my parents are like my complexion. My sister is darker than both my parents. And then my brother is, lighter than both my parents. And that's typical for a Fulani family because there are three different hues in the family. So they usually say that red Fulani, that they call the Imbororo, that they named after that red cow. They say that, usually the red Fulani is usually the one interested in the cows a lot. And then the black Fulani are usually the sedentary, more settled Fulani. So there's no specific category for the other shade, but those are the two main shades. And so when studying the Fulani of the Sudan, they said there were three types, and one were they called the scholars from Food Tajal to come there, and that's the book Fulani, they called them. And then there were another group that they called the Imbororo or whatever. They were the cattle herding Fulani. They were in the south in different areas. So that was the cow Fulani. And then they said there's a combination of both who are the book and the cow Fulani. So when I studied myself, I said, "Oh, that's me right there. I'm that book and cow Fulani." I mean, I always wanted a library. Alhamdulillah, I have one now, and I always loved dairy, so I'm my diet to this day is still mostly dairy. I'm like a cow Fulani. Not all Fulani are into milk like that, but those who are of the cow Fulani, we're really into dairy, milk. It's like we can't live without it. So, so I'm going to show you how Allah, through circumstance, brought those two different types of Fulani together in this particular clan, American clan of Fulani. We come from Futa, we come from Africa, we come from Guinea, more than likely, and Allah created a special clan here. And this is how. So, my direct paternal lineage is from a family called the Beatties. Now, that name Beatty, as I said in the last presentation, is usually found among Arabs. Beatty, which is one of the attributes of Allah, or they say Badi. And but we generally don't have that name among us. The name that closely resembles that in Africa is Baldi, which is the name they gave me when I went to Futa Jallin, which was Ba. But that name Beatty is, and being that my direct paternal lineage, you look at them, they're all Fulani. So that was more than likely the name. Among them, they had names like IC, ED. Now, you may say, well, that's a corruption of the English word Eddie. But what I found among Fulbe people was that if their name is Idrissa, they will call themselves Edie for short. If it's Isatu, they would say Isi or Isa. These are shortened names of the Muslim names. And when we were in slavery, we had to hide our Muslim names. So if you said Beatty instead of Baldi, they'll probably just overlook the Beatty. But if you said Baldi, they might know that, oh, that's African. So Beatty, and they may accept that over Baldi because they were taking away our African names. So we had to be clever in how to keep it without them knowing it, like hidden in plain sight. So, my paternal family, they are no doubt the cow Fulani. Yes, they were cattle Fulani. So when I spoke to one of our elders, an historian of that branch of the family, he told me how they started here in Virginia. This is where they started. They didn't start in Georgia. They wound up there. So Fulani have an east-west migration. So they started here in Virginia. This is a map of America with their cattle. And they made their way down to North Carolina. They made their way down to South Carolina. They made their way down to Georgia, where most of them settled. But then the cow Fulani branch of the family of the Beatties, they kept going. And they said the last they heard of them where they were somewhere in, Oklahoma, Arkansas. Where's that? Where's this place? Excuse me. Right here, Oklahoma. So from here, making a west migration like Fulani, east-west. The last they heard of the cattle herding Beatties were in Oklahoma. Now, Bilali was here. He started from the Bahamas, which is out this way. I don't have it on the map, excuse me. And they captured him and they brought him to the Bahamas, him and his wife, and then they brought them here to Georgia. And you know what I found very interesting, talk about genetic memory. The first time I ever left America, the first place I ever went when I left America was the Bahamas. That's very interesting. I call that memory. And so many things in my life proves that genetic memory is not a theory. It's just real. There's no doubt in my mind. So here he was in Georgia. Some of his descendants started moving because of they conscripted or drafted them into the war, into the army. So their training base was here in South Carolina. and sometimes North Carolina. So the Bilahis were going in one direction, while the cattle herding going in the opposite direction. Now, when I thought about that, when he told me that, I said, wow, that's bold. That's bold because do you know, like here, usually black folks were escaping going north. But the cattle herding Beatties, they kept going south and west, where they were hanging black folks. That is typical Fulani behavior. Fulani will risk their life to feed their cattle. You could tell a Fulani there's a war going on over there. Don't go over there. They're killing people. And the Fulani will say, well, is there some grass there? Can I feed my cows over there? Well, I'm going there. I'm going to take my chances because, the cows got to eat. So if there's no grazing land in Virginia, we got to go south. We don't care that they still enslaving black people and, they're going to hang us. We don't care nothing about that. If there's grazing land in the south, we're going south. So these cattle herding Beatties left from Virginia, went down, and then the Bilahis were going north for the army and stuff. So as I told you in the first presentation, he had 12 daughters. So the Beatty men met the daughters of Bilahi, obviously, or the men of Bilahi met the daughters of the Beatties. And these families, as they go on, because my father's paternal grandfather's family is from North Carolina. My paternal mother's family is from South Carolina. And then the Beatties, which is my direct paternal line, settled in Georgia, where the Bilahis was. And my mother's direct maternal line is in Georgia. So when I went on Ancestry, as I told you, all three branches were related because obviously they all intermarried during that particular route that the Beatties took from Virginia down to Georgia. They met many descendants. And as I told you, it's genetic memory. I'm trying to prop this thing up, so excuse me. Give me a second as I prop up this. Let me just put something here to keep it from falling. Okay, voila. So as I was saying that, I noticed every branch, and it blew my mind because I rarely know anyone whose every branch of their family is related. When I say every branch, I mean my father's mother's side is related to my mother's side. My mother's side is also related to my father's paternal grandfather's mother's side. So obviously this was the men meeting the women. And they're also, my father's maternal side is also related to my father's paternal side to a lesser degree, but to a higher degree when it comes to this Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, that particular route. So each clan or family had many descendants, and those descendants intermarried among each other. Now you may say, well, how is that possible? You have to think of old America. And old America, how did black folks live? There was segregation. What happens in segregation? Everybody lives in one same community. First of all, we weren't 30 to 40 million as we are today. We probably were only 5 million strong. In our lessons, all the way up in 1930, that was after almost 400 years of being in America, we were only at 17 million. So imagine going back further. We were only at 6 million, 5 million. So this is easy to occur because you have a limited number of black people and they all live in the same areas. So when the Beatties went down, they didn't go in the white areas. Of course, they went through the black areas. And that's where Bilahi descendants were. They were in those areas concentrated with our people. So it was easy for these different clans to meet up and intermarry, and that's how all branches of the family are related to each other. So And again, they went to Oklahoma and then they kept moving. Now, I want to do a part 3 because this produced a very unique type of people here in America. And I'm talking about not just Fulani descendants, but other people, which I will get into, inshallah, in the part 3, which I found very interesting when I study ancestry. So now I want to your DNA analysis and, you know, how these things come about. So again, as I was saying on part 1, about how they give you all this Cameroon, Congo, and all this other stuff, in a whole bunch of countries bunched up into this one category, right? And again, not that those places are, you know, makes you a less people, no, but in their mind, it does. It shouldn't be in your mind, but in their mind, they're basically saying you are jungle people, because when you think of Cameroon, Congo, Namibia, Angola, and all those people, you know, you have the second world there. You have civilization there today, but they claim they brought the civilization there. So what they're basically saying, you were jungle people and we brought you that civilization in those areas when the whites moved down to South Africa. This is what they are subtly saying. Subtly. When you go to the museums, if you go to my video, Racism at the Museum, it's on my YouTube page, youtube.com/Elijah Shabazz. And, you know, when they show you Cameroon, Congolese people, they show you they're naked, they walk around with no clothes and spears, and you get what I'm saying. So when they put everybody in those categories, they basically saying you didn't come from civilized people. Then they give you a little bit of Mali, a little bit of Senegal, right? Notice they don't give you any Mauritania. They rarely give you, they just say Mali, Senegal, not Mauritania. Why not? Because again, they don't want you to know that you were the Moors that brought them civilization. They don't show you Middle East traces, even if it's 3 or 4%. And again, having Middle East ancestry doesn't make you better. That's not what I'm saying. But there's a peculiar admixture that the Moors had, which were African, Arab, and Berber, along with those 3 groups: Black African, Arab, and North African Berbers. So that particular admixture, if they don't show you that, then you think, oh, all my DNA comes from the southern people who they tell you are jungle people and not the people that brought them civilization. So that is a very subtle racism there. So when you go to other calculators, like the ones available on Genesis and GEDmatch, and you look, you say, oh, okay, as it was my experience, I saw no Middle Eastern DNA. I saw no North African DNA on Ancestry. I go into the Genesis calculator, there it is, bang. First of all, I have far, far less R1b, or what they call European DNA, which is R1b, and I'm going to get into that in a second. Far less. They gave me 24%. I went to Genesis, I got me a 50% discount on my European DNA. And then I saw the North African DNA. Then I saw the Middle Eastern DNA. And even on Genesis, if you don't know how to read it, you won't understand it, because they'll use a term like Laboch, Laboch, Laboch. And you will say, well, what is that? And they'll tell you it's Pakistani. No, that's Middle Eastern. Then other calculators, they'll have Southwest Asia or West Asia. And then some calculators will have North African, the others will have Mediterranean, and others will say Southwest Europe. How do you put North Africa in Southwest Europe? But this is the head game that some of these people play to hide your genetic makeup. It's in your face if you know how to read it, but they want to hide it from you. Because again, they assign purity to certain people. They assign savagery to certain people. our people, particularly those in the jungle who are pygmies or whatever, which, let me just say this about the so-called sub-Saharan African. You know, the nation, they call them the tribe of Shabazz, who, you know, said strayed away from civilization and are living a jungle life. Okay. Those people are magnificent and they're brilliant. I've seen stories where, you know, some of them, our people, let me say, what I'm saying, those people, our people are brilliant and magnificent. And, you know, it's in some of our people that are in that particular area, they have a more, how do I, you know, in the teachers it says they are closer to nature. They know how to work with a bird. There's a particular creature that hides up in the tree. And certain tribes, they know how to work with the woodpecker, and the woodpecker goes and hunt for them and bring them the creature back. That's the type of skill that Suleiman, peace be upon him, had, the language of the birds, to send the birds somewhere to spy for him and have them come back. Our people that they call jungle people have that skill, which is the skill of Solomon. That is a divine skill. There's our people in one country, I can't think of it now, but where they call sub-Saharan Africa. He wrapped his leg with the cast, put it into a snake pit. Not just any type of snake pit, an anaconda snake pit. You know how long an anaconda is? Anaconda is as long as a city block. He sticks his leg inside of an anaconda pit. The anaconda bites down on it. He pulls it out, and they chop the anaconda's head off. That is amazing. So we should never be ashamed of sub-Saharan African DNA, even though our primary DNA might be from North Africa or, you know, Mauritania and you know, Libya and all those other ancient Egypt and what have you, and we're not necessarily, direct lineage may not necessarily come from sub-Saharan Africa, but that doesn't make you a better people, because either way, there's brilliance and creativity and divinity from every branch of black people. And we here in America, we have both people in us, the North African people and the so-called sub-Saharan African people. We are made up of all of them, and including what they call the European. So, when you look on those different groups, particularly Cameroon, Rwanda, Nigeria, South Africa, Namibia, Angola, Congo, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, Ivory Coast, Guinea-Bissau, Southern Algeria. So in that whole group of Cameroon and Congo, I'm going back to ancestry right now, you have all of these countries. Do you know what's in those countries and why they put you in those categories? In those countries are Africans with R1b. R1b, which they say is European DNA. So when they say you're 24% European, Northwest Europe and all that stuff, what they're basically saying is that you have high levels of R1b. Okay? But that doesn't make you European. And none of you should think that, oh, I'm a mutt. First of all, a mutt is a disrespectful term. It's a disrespectful term that they will use to say you're an impure race. You understand? An impure race. You're mixed with white, you're mixed with sub-Saharan African, you're mixed with that. You're a mutt. Right? And no, you're not a mutt. Because every human being has an admixture. And because they have an admixture, that's how the DNA calculators could tell one human being, one tribe, one people from another because of their admixture. So I want to give you a prime example of what I mean by admixture. And let me try to simplify it, because I can use a lot of technical terms, but what's the point? You know, what's the point of teaching and people don't understand what you're saying? So let me make it simple. Let's say a latte, right? So in that latte, you will have milk, mostly milk, and coffee. So let's say Americano. Let me get Americano with a little bit of milk. So that one will have a lot of black coffee with a little bit of milk. Maybe skim, maybe whole milk. And then you might say, let me get a caramel macchiato. So now you add in another element, caramel, with milk, with coffee, and sugar. So you got 4 elements there. All of this is coffee, but the admixture is different. So then you get a vanilla latte. So there's no caramel, it's vanilla instead. There's milk, there's coffee, and there's sugar. Different admixture. So what makes every human being a human being is an admixture. There's no such thing as I'm mixed or not mixed. In order to be a Fulani, you have to be mixed. You have to be an admixture of certain groups and certain haplogroups, haplotypes, alleles. Alleles means like type of genes that give you certain type of features. For instance, let's start with R1b, okay? So let's look at these different elements of admixtures, right? Now, R1b. So here it is, R1b, which is found all over Europe. And usually when you have this, you come up as a percentage of European. Some might be 25%, some might be 30%, whatever. But what makes the calculator say that you're part European is because you have R1b. But this R1b originates in Africa. R1b originates in Africa. We gave it to the European. So because you have more R1b in your admixture, doesn't make you less African. It just makes you a different admixture of African. So let's go to the Middle East. You have this haplogroup or whatever called J1, which is found in Africa. All of it originates in Africa, but it's also found in the Middle East. So when you have that, they'll say, oh, you're a certain percentage of Middle Eastern because this is a haplotype that is primarily found in the Middle East. Then you have what's called E1B1. Okay? And this is primarily found in West Africa as well as all over Africa. So when you have this E1B1, you'll be a certain percentage of West Africa. And then there's others that'll make you a certain or more of Sub-Saharan Africa, which you'll come up as San, Khoi, or Pygmy, or so forth. But I'm not going to get into all these terms because I don't want to confuse you. I'm just going to use 4. Now, when you deal with, so you got the European, you got the Middle East, and you got the West Africa, or Black Africa. So every people are a certain percentage of certain haplogroup haplotypes or alleles. This R1b is what's called the light skin gene. And that's why you have 100% Africans, such as Ethiopians, Berbers, Fulani, Tuareg, Somalis, Eritreans, which are also Ethiopians, Oromo, Tigray. They're light-skinned because they have this gene which originates in Africa called R1b. R1b also is an allele that allows you to be lactose tolerant. Lactose tolerant. So you find this among most nomads, cattle herding nomads in particular, not just any nomads, cattle herding nomads. They'll have high levels of R1b because this is what makes them lactose tolerant. There are other genes that, you know, so this gives you, these genes are affiliated with skin tone, lactose tolerant, and so forth. Again, having that doesn't make you less African. It doesn't make you, a mixed individual. It's just you're an African with a particular admixture. J1, the same thing. E1B1, the same thing. Then I'm going to deal with a matrilineage here. U5B1B. Okay? This is called the nomad gene. Excuse me, I'm writing offline because I'm looking through my phone. Hold on one second. The nomad gene. And it's found among Fulani, Berbers, Tuareg, North Africans. Okay? So this is also found in Europe, and it's called U5A1B. But that's European again. That's genetic racism, because why are we B? Why are we secondary and they're A, which is first? You see? What they're basically saying is that they're the first people. But we'll take B for black. U5B1B, U5A1B. If you got A1B, that means you have a European matrilineage, which is a different type of U5. So when you understand these type of different genes and alleles, when your DNA goes into a calculator, what makes me come up Fulani, let's say, on a calculator, is because I have a certain admixture. I got R1B, I got a little J1, you see, which is the Middle Eastern. I got some E1B1, a certain percentage of E1B1, and I'll have a U5B1B X chromosome. So if your X chromosome is U5B1B, and you have a certain percentage of E1B1, and a certain percentage of J1, and a certain percentage of R1B, you come up as a Fulani in the calculator. Now, if you're mostly, let's say, R1B, and you have no U5B1B, or let's say you're mostly R1B with a U5X gene, then you come up U5A1B, which means that you are mostly R1B European, as they would say. You have a whole lot of R1B. You have very little to no E1B1. You might have a little J1 or H1 or whatever. I don't want to use a whole bunch of terms to confuse you, but the point I'm making is that that's how the calculator know, oh, this is a European, because of the particular admixture. So let's say, and I think you get my point, and then there's a particular genes that for instance, this is very interesting. A lot of times you may come up Caucasian, right? And you may say, well, what's the difference? Particularly in Genesis, they'll have Northwest European, then they'll have Caucasian. And in your mind, you'll be saying, isn't that the same thing? No, it's not the same gene. It's not. They're two different genes. Now, people think Caucasian automatically means white. No. Did you know that Ethiopians are Caucasians? Do you know that Somalis are Caucasians? Do you know that Berbers are considered Caucasians? Do you know that Fulani are considered Caucasians? Caucasian is not a color. Caucasian is a phenotype. Alkaline nose, Cro-Magnon neck, ears are shaped, cranium shape. And there are genes that are affiliated with phenotype. So if you have that gene that's affiliated with that phenotype, that produces that type of phenotype, and you have the gene that produces that certain color, the calculators will tell you what people you belong to, not because they look at you and see you, but they know that these phenotypes, these genes that are affiliated with this phenotype, this color, this allele that gives you that, this lactose intolerant, this U5, this person is of this group of people, because this group of people have that genetic makeup. This group of people have a particular genetic makeup. So what you what makes you you, U5, but what makes you you is these admixtures. So if you're African, even if you have a white relative, right? So let's say, I'm going to draw a circle. And I'm going to tell you that you should never say I'm mixed because, again, admixture is a part of being human. You are 100% African if you're African. Even if you have other relatives from different races in Africa or different tribes, you might have a Hausa relative, you might have, a Mindi relative, a Bambara relative on your peripheral or tangential. But where you determine yourself, your nature and who you are, is what is your direct patrilineage and what is your direct matrilineage. So, being that I'm dealing with Fulani, let's say, okay, let me turn this here. I hope this is being helpful to you to understand. So let's say let's say my Y DNA is affiliated with Fula people, right? My X DNA is also Fula people, right? And this is true. But let's say, so this is your direct patrilineage, right? Paternal. Hope y'all can see this. And let's say this is your direct maternal. Once you have that, no matter what else, you're still 100% Fula. And I'm going to tell you why. Because everything else, this is your tangential relatives. What do you mean by tangential relatives? Your paternal, maternal side. You're going to get DNA from your paternal, maternal side, which will give you a unique overall admixture, but it doesn't change your X and Y. So this, let's say there's more E1B1 on this side, right? So to be a Fulani, let's say, I'm just using Fulani as an example, you already have E1B1. So now you're just getting extra E1B1. So let's say if the median or average is for Fulani is 20%. So now you got a paternal, let's say from the Bambara or whatever, who might have more E1B1. So now you got 40%. So now you're a little more dark skinned. Your phenotype might be slightly different, but you're still a Fulani. Why? Because your direct patrilineage and matrilineage, you're going to be of the nature, the thinking, and the seed. You understand? Or the maternal. The seed is what determines who you are. You're going to think and do as your fathers did, your father's fathers, your father's fathers. As the Quran says, when they ask the question, if when we are dead and dry bones, how will we come back? How will we be resurrected? And Allah says it is one cry, one call. And He said, how about our fathers? It's one cry, one call, because in you is your father, your father's father, your great-grandfather, your great-great. It's all in that seed. So this extra E1B1, or let's say you had a white relative over here, Fula already have R1B. So now, let's say the average Fula medium was 15% R1B. And let's say on your paternal maternal side, you might have a white relative. So now you got, all that means is that you got extra R1B. That's all that means. You got extra R1B. So if the median was 15% for Fula already, you might have 25% because you got a white on your paternal maternal side. That is your peripheral. You see, relatives. Peripheral. It is not your direct descent. So let's say on your paternal grandfather's maternal side. Let's say there's an Arab there. So your Fulani, you already have J1. You have, usually Fulani have 3 to 4%, 5% Middle East. So let's say you got some extra from this tangential Arab. it doesn't change your overall genetic makeup. It just means that instead of having an average 5%, you might have 10% Arab. So you just got a little more J1. Do you understand? So let's say, I forget what the haplogroup for Native American is. So let's say on this branch, there's a tangential Native American. I think it comes up as Southeast Asia on Genesis, or American sometime. So we already have that in Africa. We have every aspect of DNA in Africa already. So it doesn't change your 100% African DNA. No, it just means you'll get a little bit more as Southeast Asian. Forgive me, I don't know the haplogroup. I do know it, but I can't think of it. Southeast Asian. But it does not change your 100% African or 100% Fula, 100% Berber, 100% Bambara, 100% whatever. It just gives you a different admixture. Instead of having 15% R1B, you have 25. Instead of having 5% J1, you got 10%. This doesn't change your direct patrilineage or matrilineage, which makes you who you are. And it may give you a different skin tone, that's about it. It may even change your phenotype a little bit, but your actual nature, your thinking, and all your genetic memory is going to generally come from your direct patrilineage and matrilineage. And the proof of that is that as I was studying this thing, I found women that have my same X chromosome, U5B1B, right, which is found among the Fulani. And even though we were 5 generations apart, 7 generations apart, I looked at those women, I found some of them on Facebook, and they look exactly like my mom. Exactly like, my grandmother. Exactly like Fulani women in Futa-Jalan. Because they have that X chromosome that goes all the way back to Futa-Jalan, all the way back to North Africa, all the way back. And they have the exact same face, exact same features, just a slight variation, but they'll have the same features. It's the same with the Y chromosome. That's why, you could tell a Fula by their face, because if you got that Y chromosome, you're going to look the same, even though you might have more J1, more R1B, more whatever. You might have a bunch of R1B, you may even look white. But your phenotype, your features are going to look the same. So, so this is what makes us. It's an admixture. And I'm going to end with this. There's a sister on Facebook, one of my young Fulani sisters. And she studied biology. I should say her name, but I don't want to put her on the spot like that. She studies biology, and one day she posted something which I thought was very deep. She said a human biologist is a fully developed germ studying other germs. That is the truth. I'm going to say that again. A human biologist is a fully developed germ that's studying other germs. And as I read from you in the Quran, everything I'm talking about are germs. The J1, the R1B, these are germs. And the Quran says, have not we created you from a small life germ? So what I want to go into in part 3, inshallah, is the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, which, he talked about Yaqub, and he looked into the germ of the black man. And he found 2 colors, black and brown, by looking into the germ. And that's what this whole DNA science is doing, looking into the germ of the human being and making calculations. And some of them are inaccurate, but a lot of times they are accurate when they use a good median admixture. Now, let me say this. Let me give you this last example and I'll close out. On Genesis, me, my cousin, and I was comparing our DNA because we both come up Fulani in most of the calculators, right? And then there was one calculator where we came up Fang. And I'm like, okay, this calculator's wrong because every other calculator we come up Fulani, and of course you look at us with Pulo. But why did we come up Fang? Because Fang is one of the African groups that have high R1B. So because so this particular calculator was calculating our overall admixture, and they put us as Fang because our overall admixture is African, with some R1B that they say is European, but it's African too. So we came up Fang. The reason why you may come up something different in a different calculator is not because you don't come from the Fulani, let's say, not because you don't come from the Hausa, let's say you're Hausa, and let's say you have a little more R1B, because Hausa have smaller amounts of R1B, but they have R1B. So because you might have a little bit more R1B, you may come up, instead of coming up Hausa, you might come up Fulani because you have more R1B. But that doesn't make you not Hausa. That just means you have a little more R1B. So we came up Fang because of the R1B, and because Genesis does not yet have typed and in their genetic calculators Fulani from Niger and Fulani from Cameroon. Now, if they add those types into their calculation, you'll come up, if you have a more R1B, you'll see you come up as a Fulani from Cameroon or Fulani from Niger, because they have 15 to 30% R1B. And they're 100% African, but they'll have 15 to 30% R1B, which they will say is European, but it's not. It's African R1B. So I hope this was helpful to you studying your analysis. I know I went many places. I started with the Quran, and and I don't regret that. And using this situation of how Allah brings about a resurrection through circumstance by bringing the cattle herders with the scholarly Bilahis, and the cattle herding and bringing those two groups together in order to produce the resurrection, and how to read your DNA analysis. And we want to do a part 3 about this man called Yaqub, who people think is just mythology, and people say that is not Islam, to talk about races. How is it not Islam? The Quran says, surely I created you in tribes and families so that you may know one another. He created us in tribes and families so that you may have knowledge. You may know one another. So when you study the human being, as we're doing right now, is to know, okay, what makes this tribe this way? What makes this tribe look like this? What makes that tribe look like that? What makes this human being this skin tone? Allah created us in different tribes and families so that we may know one another. So it's not against Islam to study Yaqub's history and how he made a new man. That is right in line with Islam. Allah asks you to do that in the Quran. And inshallah, in part 3, inshallah, we're going to go into Yaqub's history as it relates to the discoveries of the human genome, which is actually catching up with Quran and catching up with the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So thank you for listening so much. There's a lot we could say, but we'll save it for part 3. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.